I should like to make a statement explaining what has happened and leave it to the chair to decide about this adjournment motion. Some weeks ago, government was faced with rather a difficult situation in regard to sugar. As the House is aware, we had decontrolled sugar in 1947 and sugar continued to be distributed without any intervention by government. It was only with regard to the fixation of prices that there used to be informal consultations and discussions between the central government and the governments of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar and the industry. But even these prices were not fixed statutorily because we had decided upon decontrolling sugar. In the month of August or towards the end of July, it became apparent that as the prices of sugar were rising, government would have to take some action. We found that up to the month of June, the consumption of sugar was more or less at a normal rate. It is true that consumption of sugar had increased because during the period of control, many persons who did not otherwise use sugar got accustomed to using sugar as sugar was rationed to all card holders. Secondly, the price of sugar has also been lowered from Rs 35 to Rs 29. The result was some increase in consumption. But still, because there was a carry-over of 2 lakh tons from the previous year, it was felt that we would be able to reach the end of the year without any difficulty. As the House is probably aware, production starts somewhere about the middle or third week of November, in some places in October, and in some other parts of India in December. Round about the month of July, 2 factors intervened. First of all, there was a talk of export of sugar to Pakistan and later on possibly also to the United Kingdom. That talk had its reaction on the market. The second factor was that an announcement was made that as a result of the increased consumption up to June and July, a very small quantity of sugar remained with the factories. With about 3 to 4 months still ahead, the stock which was disclosed was definitely inadequate, probably meeting only half the needs. This itself had an effect on the market and very speculative purchases were made during these days. We therefore began to discuss this question with all the interests concerned. I had full discussions also with the Standing Committee of the Legislature. Later on, we proposed certain measures and consulted the state governments with regard to those measures. Some of the state governments were against our interfering too much and were definitely against rationing of sugar. On the other hand, 1 or 2 state governments wanted that we should ration sugar. Ultimately, we discussed the whole question in the cabinet, first in the economic committee of the cabinet and then in the cabinet, and decided to take certain measures with a view to dealing with the difficult situation. We first of all froze all the stocks in the country. The UP government had frozen the stocks in their state about a week before with a view to conserving stocks and preventing their transfer to trade whom we might not be able to effectively to control. We sealed the stocks both in UP and Bihar and the rest of India. Having sealed the stocks, we fixed the price for sale of the frozen sugar. We had very limited resources at our disposal. Unlike food grains, sugar was not in our physical possession. It was in the factories. A good part of it had already been sold and the quantity which remained was inadequate for the remaining part of the year. Therefore, we felt it necessary to arm our state governments with complete powers to deal with the local situation. That meant that it was open to them to freeze the stocks with the dealers wholesale or retail, and also to fix such distributing agencies as they preferred for the purpose of selling sugar at the controlled price to the people. Now, it is inevitable that where government is faced with a situation where a certain commodity is definitely very much in short supply in relation to the demand, it is not possible if government distributes or rations the commodity to give to the people the full quota needed by them. Government had to choose between two alternatives, either to import more sugar to affect the price level and meet any deficit that there might be, or to try and use such supplies of sugar as were at their disposal. Import was not possible because of dollar and other considerations. In 1963, there was a thinking in the government that perhaps the patent law was not necessary and that it should be abrogated. Some of our experts had gone to Russia and they have come back with this thinking. Therefore, this matter was kept suspended. Sir, I have listened with great interest the discussion on this motion. There are three definitely important points in the report of the Select Committee. One is about the raising of the age of the boy as well as of the girl. The second point is about the nature of the punishment. Whereas in the original act the punishment is fine or imprisonment, what is being sought here is that the punishment will be substantial punishment plus fine. The third point is about the nature of investigation into offences under this Act. It is said that offences should be cognizable, bailable, and non-compoundable. I agree, sir, that the intention of the honourable member who is in charge of this bill is undoubtedly good. I share his enthusiasm for social progress. I also share the view that now that this government is a government of the people, instead of taking a neutral attitude on such matters, the government should take a definite and positive attitude. But in social matters, especially when they concern not a few, not a section, not a class, here and there, but practically the whole community, it is only wisdom that we should move with a little caution. In 1929, when the original act was passed, the government of the day undoubtedly laid down a great principle. When it was sought to oppose this particular bill by the orthodox section of the House on the ground that this House had no jurisdiction to interfere in matters social and religious, it was definitely laid down that when there is a great and corroding evil and there is a promising remedy, it was the duty of the government to remove it by legislation. Undoubtedly, in the year 1929, the evil was very great, and so great was it that even a foreign government felt that it would be justified in interfering with what was obviously a social matter. But things have definitely changed. In the course of the last 20 years, there has been a steady progress and understanding of this problem. No social reforms can be abiding in its effect if it merely rests on fear and not on conviction. If people concerned should know that child marriage is a great evil, it is far better that it should be left to them to carry out this reform voluntarily. In 1929, the original bill was passed, and then in the year 1936, there was an amendment. The amending bill was brought by Mr. Lal Chand, and a few days after, another bill was introduced, and to some extent in a modified form was also passed. The credit went to my honorable and old friend Mr. B. Das. The real remedy, then it was pointed out, was not to make the offence cognizable, but provision should be made that a marriage in breach of provisions of that act would be considered invalid, null and void. That was a radical remedy. It was there pointed out that that was a radical remedy, no doubt, but not a promising remedy, and in the long run, the consequences that would follow would be disastrous. The object of the social reformer would be frustrated. It was then agreed that the bill was much in advance of public opinion, and this particular provision was not pressed by the Congress party, which was then in opposition. But certain other matters were taken into consideration, and one of them was that in the original bill provision was made that if the marriage in contravention of the particular provisions of that act was celebrated in British India, then only it was an offence. By the subsequent amendment, the jurisdiction became extraterritorial in the sense that if the marriage against the provisions of this act was celebrated in any territory outside British India, it was also considered as an offence. From stage to stage, amendments have been effected, always with a view to seeing that we are not considerably in advance of public opinion. The present position, sir, is this. So far as the educated and upper classes are concerned, the problem is not of age of marriage, the problem is of marriage itself. I doubt whether girls are married even at 17 or 18. So that section of the community has practically little to gain from the contemplated piece of legislation. As regards the masses, what happened immediately after this original 1929 bill was introduced? It will be very interesting to note, sir, that this was written by one of the newspapers in West Bengal. So far as the attitude of the government is concerned, I want to make it quite clear that government will not agree to the raising of the age either of the boy or the girl as it has been reported by the select committee. The age of the boy is being raised to 20, which is a jump of only 2 years. Madam, I beg to move that the bill to prevent the commission of offences of atrocities against the members of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, to provide for special courts for the trial of such offences and for the relief and rehabilitation of the victims of such offences and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, as passed by the Lok Sabha, be taken into consideration. This House is aware of the deep concern that our Prime Minister and our government have for the welfare of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. Many new initiatives have been taken, particularly in the last few years, to improve the lot of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. Since we got independence, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and then Miss Indira Gandhi and now our Prime Minister have been trying to improve the economic and social conditions of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. In trying to discharge a mandate of the Constitution, poverty alleviation programs which provide special attention to the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes have been expanded and intensified. First, the IRDP and other programs were improved considerably, and now these have been replaced a bigger scheme of the Jawahar Rojgar Yojana. Drinking water wells and irrigation wells have been provided for this group. The needs of housing have been met by the Indira Awas Yojana. The program for the liberation of scavengers has been given a great impetus. The education of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, which is of crucial importance to their growth and development, has received much greater attention. The number of students studying beyond the matriculation stage has gone up to 13 lakhs. Coaching centers have been increased. A special drive is currently on for filling up the backlog which had arisen as a result of non-fulfillment of reserved seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. And that drive is continuing. Efforts are also being made to free them from bonded labor and to find land for cultivation. As you all know, among the landless laborers, about 48% are from the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. We are witnessing today the sign of fruits of development reaching the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. With greater spread of education and with the socio-economic conditions improving, the relations in the society sometimes come under tension. Madam, previously also the Government of India has tried to remove untouchability. Under the Constitution, we have abolished untouchability. But to remove it completely from the society, in 1955, the Protection of Civil Rights Act was passed, and again, to give it more teeth, some more clauses were added to it in 1976. Now, we find that that is not enough. This act was passed specifically for the removal of untouchability and against those who are practicing untouchability. The bill which I am bringing here is especially against atrocities. For the first time, we have defined atrocities in this bill. We have said that the atrocities shall be punishable with imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 6 months, but which may be extended to 5 years with fine. We know that most of the atrocities are because of land. They insist on their minimum wages, which they are denied. When they insist on the minimum wages, then these powerful people who engage them torture them and inflict atrocities on them. Now we are witnessing today the signs of fruits of development reaching the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. With greater spread of education and improvement in the socio-economic conditions, the relations in society sometimes come under tension as a result of this change. Higher caste groups sometimes do not like the change in the socio-economic structure and tensions develop. The demand for justice, for equality, for a human living, for knowledge, for education and freedom leads in some cases to retaliation by groups who are not enlightened enough to recognize the healthy signs of growth. We can say that these are especially in the rural India and the Hindu society. In such a situation, atrocities or a variety of offences are committed on members of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. I have had occasion to tell this House regarding the recent trend, the increase of such offences against members of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, because often the question is asked in the House. The nature of these offences in many states indicated that these were not isolated instances but represented a trend in the country. In cities, towns, and the areas where the society was generally aware of the need to bring about such changes, the upward socio-economic mobility of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes was accepted and tension did not arise. But in the countryside, in the rural India, tension exists still. But in criteria rural areas, tradition is difficult to be dislodged, and from state to state it differs. Sir, I rise to present the budget for the year 1984-85. The budget has been formulated against the background of strong recovery in national income and agriculture and an equally impressive improvement in our balance of payments. These and other developments in the economy have been covered in detail in the economic survey presented to the House a couple of days ago. I shall therefore be brief in reviewing the current economic situation. In order to fulfill our social commitments and protect jobs, government had to take over a large number of sick units and sustain them through injection of fresh resources. While some of them have turned the corner, a large number of them continue to incur losses. The time has come to undertake a careful review of the performance of sick units in the public sector with a view to reducing the drain on our resources. This the government proposes to do. Economic viability must be the principal test for the survival of an enterprise. Honorable members will recall that when our government took office in January 1980, an important task before us was to revitalize the planning process and to give a new thrust to the programs of development. I am happy to say that in the last 4 years we have been able to achieve an unprecedented increase in the tempo of public investment. Within this aggregate, plans of individual states show a varied picture. Some states have managed their finances well. They have been able to raise additional resources and effectively utilize these to implement adequately sized plans, providing development and growth to their people. Unfortunately, some states, for reasons of their own, have used their resources for various other purposes. They have not invested their resources, including additional resources mobilized for development, and have also resorted to large overdrafts on the RBI. Unfortunately, despite these measures, some states continued to rely heavily on overdraft even after March 1982. Their proposed deficits at the end of March 1984 would have harshly affected the size of their plans if these deficits were adjusted against next year's plans as per normal practice. In considering the ways of overcoming this problem, I have found myself in a predicament. On the one hand, no finance minister of the country can remain unconcerned about the size of a state's plan. On the other hand, if assistance is extended to defaulting states, the well-managed states can legitimately complain that they have not got their just rewards from the center for their better performance. For those states which have managed their finances well, I am working out a suitable scheme to provide some additional assistance to them in 1984-85. This is only just and appropriate. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am sure that the House will agree with me that despite severe resources constraints of its own, the central government has done the maximum that it can to solve the state's problems. The rest, however, is up to them. In the last 4 years, the present government introduced a number of schemes for the benefit of the weaker sections of the society, particularly in the rural areas. These include the Integrated Rural Development Program, the National Rural Employment Program, and the two new programs announced by the Prime Minister on 15th August 1983, namely the Rural Landless Employment Guarantee Program and the Scheme for Providing Self-Employment Opportunities to the Educated Unemployed. Each of these programs is designed to create opportunities for employment and income generation for particular target groups while also creating productive assets. Finally, I should mention that the incentive schemes for better performance in selected areas initiated in 1983-84 will continue in 1984-85 also. As the House is aware, these schemes are designed to improve the functioning of the electricity boards and provide further impetus to the programs for small and marginal farmers, rural water supply schemes, environmental improvement in urban slums, construction of field channels in command area development projects, and adult education for women and elementary education for girls. A lump sum provision of rupees 200 crores is being made for this purpose. Lest the honorable members take me to be a magician who can do so much with so little, I hasten to clarify that the incentive scheme is designed to provide additional resources linked to performance for specified schemes. There are, of course, also separate substantial allocations for each of these schemes. I have only briefly touched upon the main priorities and objectives of the annual plan for 1984-85. In order to provide the maximum possible outlay for the 7th 5-year plan, I have taken special care to ensure that non-plan expenditure is kept at the minimum. However, certain increases in this expenditure are necessary and unavoidable. Mr. Deputy Chairman, Sir, I crave the indulgence of the House and also your indulgence for stating certain obvious facts which are very well known but which we are often apt to forget. Sir, the Indian railway system, as the Honorable House knows, is the biggest in the whole of Asia and it is the 4th biggest in the world. It is also the biggest nationalized undertaking, and nowhere is such a big experiment made and such a large area covered. Sir, when we deal with the budget proposals, we have to bear in mind this far-reaching character and the historic role that the railway system is playing in the vast country. This budget as presented to us has to be viewed and considered from this larger angle. Though the budget has taken the usual form of an annual ritual and though it indicates and projects a set pattern, it marks the culmination and the ending of a period of achievement and the budding and flowering of another period of achievement. Sir, we are in a better position today than before to assess and evaluate the results, and we can very well draw up a balance sheet of successes and failures, of achievements and setbacks, if there are any, so that we may be able to draw up a plan of further development. During the last 5 years, efforts have been made by the Ministry of Railways to realize and fulfill the goals and targets laid down in the plan. To a considerable extent, I must admit that they have been able to achieve the goals and targets laid down. All these achievements and developments that have taken place are really commendable, and we would not shirk on our side to pay compliments to them because they deserve them. But when I look at the other side, when I consider the drawbacks and failures that we saw during these 5 years, I feel, sir, that the progress achieved in the developments that they have brought about are not commensurate with the needs and requirements of the growing and developing economy. The minister in his speech has not been able to assess the extent of demand of the country for additional transport capacity, and he has not been able to give us a picture of how this challenge will be met and met adequately to remove transport difficulties in the country. I would mention some facts and leave it to the judgment of honorable members as to whether some of the steps that the Railway Ministry has taken during this period of 5 years have been able to solve the transport difficulties. In spite of the 2 plans and the additional capacity released as a result of development, the problem of congestion, which has also been referred to by other honorable members, is proving a great deterrent. It has proved a great deterrent in the past, it is proving a great deterrent at present, and perhaps it will prove a greater deterrent hereafter. This problem of congestion has been growing. Perhaps the planners were not able to visualize or anticipate the growing demand for transport in the country. Today, a very critical situation is created in spite of all developments. Goods are not being lifted from the ports. Complaints have been received about this. There is a lot of congestion at the various ports, and there has been considerable delay in moving goods from port areas. Complaints have also been heard that ores are not being moved from the mining areas, and the internal trade is put to a very severe strain. Reference was made to coal transport. Some of the reports which have appeared in today's papers are very disturbing. We are told that the crisis is very deep in the UP areas, and as a result of paucity of coal, many industries, perhaps even the railways there, and the normal life in certain of those areas in UP have suffered considerably. It is amazing that the Minister of Steel, Mines and Fuel, while replying to questions this morning, was trying to shield the Railway Minister. He was saying that the difficulty in lifting coal was not entirely due to paucity of wagons. It was due to some other reasons. But he went on to say that the local authorities had to resort to road transport to move coal from those mines. If that is so, I do not know why, if the wagons had been made available in the past and if they are made available today, there was necessity to move coal from the colliery by road transport. Road transport is costlier and ultimately it is not economic. So we can very well say that there is a sort of friction or lack of coordination between the two wings. It has also been borne out clearly that transport of goods or ores has suffered because there has been wagon shortage. If there has been no shortage, at least there has been considerable delay in getting them. Madam Deputy Chairman, this discussion on the calling attention motion for textile industry has covered the whole gamut of the industry from the grower of cotton to all other sectors. Honorable members have covered the whole field and given a number of suggestions. Madam, textiles is a very important industry in our country and it gives employment and work to millions and millions of people in the villages, in the towns, in the rural areas and in the cities. Government is fully aware of its importance in our national life from the economic, social and every other point of view. Broadly, there are three sectors of the industry: the unorganized handloom sector, the unorganized powerloom sector and the organized mill sector. Madam, you have observed from the speeches made here that there are some inherent contradictions in the interests of the various sectors. Some members have, in the same breath, tried to support all the sectors, and obviously there have been contradictions in their arguments and their presentation. If you want higher prices for the cotton grower, how can you expect reasonable prices of cotton yarn for the handloom and powerloom sectors? So, because of this obvious contradiction, there is a demand all over that the textile policy has failed and therefore it should be reviewed. Madam, the textile policy was meant basically to reconcile the varying and at times conflicting interests of the various sectors, and therefore it has not found favor with any one sector, and all the sectors are more or less feeling dissatisfied. This is bound to happen when you have a very balancing proposition like the new textile policy, where the various interests have to be reconciled and given proper place. The textile policy can be judged from 3 or 4 points of view, and it has proved successful from those angles. There has been an increase in overall cloth production. There is an increase in per capita availability of cloth. There is a great increase in exports, and the rate of increase in the prices of cloth has been minimal. Compared to the general rise in the cost of living, it is very little, just 2%, as against more than 8%, which means the common man is benefited. He is getting more cloth at a very reasonable price compared to other consumer goods and other things that are available to him. Sir, while the difficulties that have been mentioned are real, I would like to say that the policy has by and large succeeded in its aim and has proved quite satisfactory. Therefore, to review it in a manner that would satisfy everybody is just not possible. But as we go along, we are trying to modulate this policy and implement this policy in a way in which we can give as much satisfaction to a sector which needs attention at a particular time. So, there is no question of this policy having been framed on account of pressures from the mill sector or the capitalists in the mill sector, as has been said, because they have suffered the most. There has been increase in the production in the handloom sector, increase in the production in the powerloom sector, but there is a fall in the production in the mill sector. As has been said, mills have been closed in Ahmedabad and Bombay. If it were weighted in favor of the capitalists in the mill sector. As it has been said, why have they suffered the most? So we have tried to do a very balancing exercise in this way, and we will see that we try to protect everybody to the extent possible. But why is it that all the sectors are suffering? Madam, there is some basic difficulty in the whole situation which we have tried to go into. There has been excess capacity in the weaving side, and there has been fall in purchasing power because of the successive droughts and floods. There are two important reasons as of now why all the sectors are suffering. It has been said that the yarn prices have risen or the cotton prices have risen. It has not contributed so much as it has been made out. Now I will just come to some figures regarding the price of cotton. Cotton prices have risen pretty high. But if you take the price rise so far as yarn is concerned, it has not been as bad. From June 1985 to September 1987, raw cotton prices rose by 62%. Cotton yarn prices during the same period increased by only 33%. We have been varying our policies as we went along. First, we decided to export cotton because last year there was a glut in cotton and we had to procure a larger amount of cotton from the producer at the minimum support price. So we thought that a little export would help the producer, and we allowed to export. The President's address makes a mention of labor relations which we are happy have definitely improved in the country, and but for the short-lived partial strike of the central government employees last year, the country has seen a period of unprecedented industrial peace. It must, however, be mentioned that this industrial peace, an achievement of the country, is not based on a proper distribution of national income. It was with a view to giving the labor of the country, the working people of the country, a share in the rising national income that the 7th plan provided for the appointment of wage boards for certain industries. It is a matter of not a little disappointment that wage boards were set up only for 3 out of the 8 industries for which they were provided during the 7th 5-year plan. Labor in the country has helped a great deal in achieving the industrial progress of which the President has correctly made a mention. It is the hard work, discipline, and enthusiasm of the working people which is responsible for the improvement in our economic situation, of which a mention has correctly been made. It is this section of the working people of our country which has unfortunately not shared the gains of productivity, which has not shared the gains of improvement in the economic life of the country. It was with a view to giving the workers a reasonable share of the gains of our increasing prosperity that the wage boards were thought of for 8 major industries. The workers in the country are disappointed that only in the case of sugar, cotton, and cement industries, wage boards were appointed and these bodies finished their work during the 2nd plan period. That disappointment is further accentuated because of the fact that the employers in the country have not readily and enthusiastically implemented the unanimous recommendations of these bodies which were tripartite in nature, in which the employers of the country were also represented, the government has not made up its mind about the recommendations of the wage board for the sugar industry, and even the government resolutions in the case of cement and the cotton textile industries have not been implemented by the industrialists. It is a matter of great disappointment. It indicates that the people who talk so much of industrial peace are really not interested as much in industrial peace based on sharing of the gains of increased production as they are interested in intensifying the rate of exploitation. The government should be able to see that its resolutions in the matter of recommendations of wage boards, particularly in the case of textile industry, are implemented by the industry of the country as a whole. Sir, there are certain industries whose workers are making a significant contribution in the matter of our economic growth. To mention only two, the rising engineering industry and the public utility industries like the electricity supply industry are the very cornerstones of our industrial progress. It is a matter of very great disappointment that the government has not yet appointed wage boards for these industries. Sir, it is well recognized that the employees in the public utility industries like electricity supply and water supply are denied certain rights as the right to strike and the right of direct action, which employees in other industries readily enjoy, and it is only fair that the employees in the case of public utility industries like electricity supply should be among the first to be given the advantage of tripartite bodies like wage boards, and their conditions of work, their wages, their standard of living should be increased as a matter of course, as a matter of administration of social justice. It is a great disappointment to the workers in the electricity supply and engineering industries of the country that wage boards for these industries have not so far been appointed. Sir, the President's address mentions the implementation of employees' state insurance scheme. That scheme is a benefit for which the workers of the country are highly thankful. The scheme of employees' state insurance guards the health of the workers and ensures that during the period of their sickness they not only get medical leave but also half of their wages. That is a great relief to the workers, and we are thankful that the scheme has been extended from one area to the other. It is, however, a matter of some disappointment that in spite of the fact that the Act was enacted in 1948, the scheme does not cover as many factory workers of the country as it should. The fact that this scheme has been found useful by labor and industry in the country, and the fact that both workers and industry contribute to the running of this scheme makes it all the more necessary that the implementation of this scheme should be accelerated and all the 86 lakhs of factories workers should be brought under the scheme. Mr. Vice Chairman, Sir, thank you very much for having given me this opportunity even on the first day to speak on this child labor bill. Sir, I support the bill. The bill seeks to give more benefits to the child labor which is being employed in our country. Sir, I would like to submit that in our country, even 100 years ago, when Britishers were ruling us in 1881, when Lord Ripon was ruling our country, a bill was introduced in that children below the age of 7 years were not allowed to work. But in 1934, there was an amendment brought. The hours of work were considered as 5 hours for the child labor. They brought several other legislations, the Factories Act, the Plantation Labor Act, and so many other acts for the purpose of protecting the interests of the child labor. Sir, there are about 16 million child labor in our country. Of them, 10 million are employed in the urban sector and 6 million in the rural sector. Even in that, the agriculture sector alone is absorbing more than 78% of the child labor in our country. If we see the commerce and industry sector, the child labor employed there is more compared to what it was 10 years back, in spite of the welfare measures taken by the government. In spite of our saying that the child labor should be minimized, we find there is a spurt in their employment. The child labor could not be contained because of the socio-economic conditions. I would like to submit the very salient points which have been given in the bill itself by the Honorable Minister. When the Honorable Minister became the Labour Minister here, he went to the state of Tamil Nadu, especially to Sivakasi, and saw that more than 50,000 children are being employed with wretched conditions. There were no safety measures for them. Health hazards were there, and the children were not given vocational training. Proper attention was also not given to them. This bill seeks to prohibit the child labor in particular hazardous industries and regulates the employment of children in other industries. A schedule has been given for the purpose of giving employment to the children with lighter conditions. The children who are employed in such conditions should be given protection. I would like to submit further that the children who are being employed are coming for work because of abject poverty. We cannot all of a sudden eliminate the child labor for the simple reason that about 40% of the total population is living below the poverty line. Therefore, the children who are coming from the rural areas and also from the urban sector are actually helping the family, though they do not go in for education. In such a condition, I would like to tell the Honorable Minister that in the organized sector, this legislation will work well, but if you go to the unorganized sector like the construction industry and also the agriculture sector, this will not work. I would like to suggest to the Honorable Minister that he should see that this act is to be enforced with full strength, because the child labor is exploited by the employers for the simple reason that they can be paid low wages and made to work for 14 to 16 hours or according to their whims and fancies. Now they have to give minimum wages as is required under the Act. Then I would like to stress upon the point that the children's health is not given due consideration. If we go to the restaurants, tea stalls or factories, we see their wretched conditions. In other areas, we find that the children are not given the benefit which an employee is being given. That being so, bringing in this legislation would help improve the working conditions of the children who are helping their families by working in factories, plantations and in agriculture. Sir, the bill gives ample opportunity to the children who are employed in the agriculture sector, especially for the purpose of getting more wages, because wages as defined under the Minimum Wages Act will apply in this case also. On the whole, we find this bill as a social legislation which actually gives benefit to the children who have been exploited by the employers in various fields. The last point I would like to make is with regard to safety measures and health conditions. The Honorable Minister has given these items under the general category as has been given in the Factories Act and said that the same measures would apply here also. But I would like to suggest that the Child Labour Bill 1986 should have a separate clause dealing with safety measures and health conditions which can be enforced effectively by the authorities concerned. I hope our Honourable Minister would consider this proposal for effective implementation of this bill.